Hey guys, I'm back after a little bit of a hiatus. I haven't done one of these film reviews in a while, but I was invited to watch Sam Ashurst's latest film, A Little More Flesh 2. If you recall, I reviewed his previous one on my channel and I really loved it. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity and I'm glad I watched it. It's really good. It's another film within a film concept, following on from the previous feature. And I'm told that this one is an equal collaboration between Sam Ashurst and Harley D. They both did a spectacular job, and the structure will appeal to you if you like psychological stuff. Harley's performance especially took my breath away. Excellent casting also of Lawrence R. Harvey, and Sean Mahoney was great in the supporting role. He has such a sensitive, softly charismatic quality, which I really enjoyed in the film. So obviously, having watched the previous film, I came in with expectations, but this one really took me by surprise. I found it even scarier. It's so twisted and dark. Some of the scenes really disturbed me. I highly recommend you watching it at the Soho Horror Film Festival, where it's going to be screened. Watch out for hopefully a release soon afterwards. Definitely don't listen to this if you don't like spoilers. Pause here, go watch his film, and come back because this will have spoilers. Just warning you now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just run through some essential points in the film and share some associations I have. And then towards the end of my review, I'm going to share my ultimate interpretation. Okay, so we've got here a director being portrayed in this film as Sam himself. If you recall, in A Little More Flesh, he was performing the voice of the director Stanley Durrell. But here, he's actually assuming, let's say, his own identity. I'm not by any means suggesting that this is really Sam Ashurst. It's just an interesting device, kind of signaling that there's an extra layer of fantasy being removed. So we've got this director. He wants to make what he dubs a weird art film. And he wants to kind of improvise a film from a distance. So he invites these two actors, Harley and Sean, each of them to shoot 10 minutes of footage per week for the period of roughly 12 weeks. And they have to also supply like a voice-over monologue. From that, the director will then edit a narrative feature. Harley says that she loves the process of shooting. She seems enthusiastic about the project. And we see early footage of her skincare routine and makeup application. And that footage is paired with an anecdote that she shares of an actual stalking incident. So the fact that those two things are combined, it sort of aligns with what I've observed on YouTube culture, the whole get ready with me and follow me around hashtag trends, where we see makeup gurus and glam models inviting their followers to essentially watch them as they're getting ready. I've always thought that this type of content aligns a little bit with stalking in a very benign way. I'm not saying that all of us following these internet celebrities are stalkers. I mean, that's a little extreme. But it does sort of invite the desiring gaze of the audience. I mean, I should say that the film within the film is being titled Stalker. So Sam is telling his performers that the woman will be stalked by the man character. In the early sort of sequences of the film, Harley shares with Sam that she's recently been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which she says comes as a relief to her because now she can better comprehend her experience, and it was the missing piece of the puzzle her whole life. And she says that she's happy because Sam's film is providing the appropriate form in which she can fit in her concepts about her experience. So this is really interesting. It's like just a very, almost like a fleeting moment in the film. it's easy to forget it. It doesn't it doesn't come with any bells and whistles. So it's easy to just neglect this little bit of intel in the script. But actually, I think that this is the key to the film, and I'll come back to it afterwards. So the director then explains that he wants the footage to be unfiltered as much as possible. He says there may be some prompts from him on occasion, but he doesn't want to impose too much to ensure the performer's freedom to express. And Sam says he wants to be, more than anything, an overseeing eye rather than a god that intervenes too much. So we get this picture of him as not wanting to be a control freak director. That's how he's selling himself. Then we start to see some bath footage of Harley coming through on screen. And the use of the split screen is interesting as well. It's very Brian De Palma, which is cool. I like that. When I see a split screen, my mind right away goes to signifying some kind of split or some kind of breakage or chasm in the discourse. Something is collapsing in the discourse, but we're not sure where. But what intrigues me is that when she's inside the bathtub, occasionally there'll be like a little glimpse of her bare breasts. But most of the time, her chest area is pixelated. So it's interesting that there's like a little bit of a slippage, and in psychoanalysis, it's the slippage in speech and in discourse that becomes sought after. That's the thing that activates the searching element in psychoanalysis, when something just kind of slips through the cracks or hasn't been successfully covered up by the function of repression. The fact that we are almost invited to look for the slippage because it occurs intermittently is interesting to me. So that aspect of her character then becomes eroticized. So we're kind of invited almost as the viewer, like I think irrespective of gender even, to start to objectify Harley. And I think this is aligned with some really interesting and intelligent interpretations that Harley is making about who is stalking whom. And she starts to say that maybe the audience is complicit in aggressive watching. And are we simply externalizing, looking outward, when really we ought to be observing our own internal impulses? But this is all combined with the footage of her lounging in the bath. We kind of get lulled as a result of reducing her power more generally. Harley is speaking about some really interesting theoretical implications of watching and observing, and who might really be performing the stalking activity. But because it's paired with her in the bath, it sort of removes the threat of her as an intellectual powerhouse. And maybe this is kind of what the director is doing rather than what Harley herself is deciding to do with her agency. Maybe it's more the director's tactic, to try and reduce her power. So anyway, at this point around the middle of the film, the director drops a bombshell and he confesses to his male actor, Sean, that this project started because he was feeling lonely in lockdown and wanted to get the actress to send him footage so that he could feel less lonely. Sean accuses Sam of tricking Harley, I think rightly so, but Sam refuses to accept that this is a form of trickery. He calls it a shrine of footage, as some kind of grand romantic gesture, like giving Harley a present. But of course, Sean challenges him and points out that it's in fact Harley who's giving Sam the present. She's giving away moments from her day, giving them over to the director. So she's really the one doing the giving, and he's doing the taking. So it's interesting that he would want to interpret it as the other way around. Now, Sean worries that his portrayal of the stalker character in the film might actually be representing Sam, and he's got misgivings about that, and he wants some reassurance and clarification about that. Now, Sam admits that he enjoys watching Harley's bath footage and interprets her content as flirtatious. He believes that her output must be a secret code that is like fulfilling the function of a love letter, signaling that she has feelings for him. Like when she sends him footage of her reading, she's really trying to covertly let him know that she's intelligent. Or that when she shares the footage of herself cooking, she's trying to prove to Sam that she'll make a good wife for him. And then the yoga footage is meant to be like titillating because she's stretching her body, and I don't know. I can't imagine what was being implied by that. But anyway, that is some kind of like erotic, sexy thing. Now, on the surface, like when I first watched this movie, I loved that it was kind of representing the narcissistic personality disorder that the director here, he has this delusion that his actress is carefully planning some secret language of love, and that all of the activities she's performing, it's not that they're just run-of-the-mill everyday activities, that actually all of this is a secret language to communicate how much she loves him, and that she's really being flirtatious, and it's all just an effort to show adulation and admiration and affection. Now, this would be the way that a narcissist would interpret perfectly banal, run-of-the-mill, ordinary activities. They would feel compelled to read into those behaviors and just assume that they're loved, loved beyond measure. Now, Sean sees right through all of this because he's just like a pragmatic guy, and he informs Sam that no, this is not romantic. What he's reading into this and what he's doing is creepy. And of course, the director protests, and he says that he's a feminist. And this actually made me laugh because often it's those people who want to insist that, let's say, they're good people, signal their positive qualities. It's always those people who announce their morality who, in my experience, ultimately cause the most harm. If a person's good, they don't need to say it. Their actions speak for them. But if you need to like brand yourself a certain way, then I don't know. I always feel a bit uncomfortable when people start citing their positive labels. Anyway, Sean doesn't accept Sam's excuse. He actually ultimately quits the film because he's deeply uncomfortable with Sam's agenda. So instead of doing some self-reflecting and getting some perspective, Sam instead decides to put Harley on the spot and just announces to her that he can see that she's intentionally trying to be alluring and that, she must have feelings for him. But anyway, she denies those feelings and actually says that she's married. She recently got married and that she must have mentioned her husband before, but Sam denies this. He sounds pretty embarrassed by the fact that his feelings for her haven't been reciprocated, and then changes tact quite dramatically, claims that Sean left the project because he's actually unhappy with Harley's footage. Sam then announces that from now on, moving forward, he's going to start giving Harley more prompts, more directives to create content for a specialist clientele who is willing to buy very specific short form videos directly from him. And he threatens Harley legally. He says that she must do whatever he says or he'll lawyer up and sue her. She's the root of Sean's departure. She's at fault and she has to do everything she can to make this better. And he warns Harley that she'll get a bad reputation if she doesn't follow his instructions. This is a quote from the film. He says, "This is low-budget filmmaking for you. You have to improvise and find a way through difficult challenges." So now we start to see this new type of footage coming through. Sam is applying a lot of heavy pressure on Harley to perform a certain way. So the first thing we see is hot girl eating fruit. The first take of this is just a straight-on angle, and it seems to be quite ordinary footage of someone, consuming pieces of fruit. There's no eye contact with the camera. It seems to be very true to life, very naturalistic. But we have to assume that this didn't please the director. So there's a second take. Now the camera is on a down angle and the food is being eaten very suggestively, evoking fellatio. And Harley is wearing a loose-fitting robe as opposed to just ordinary clothes as in the first take. And she maintains a persistent eye contact with the camera. So suddenly, it's a very different type of content, okay? It's pretty clear that Sam is directing Harley to be more sexual. The next set of images are from Hot Girl taking pictures. And it starts off with, playful and suggestive posing. Harley's wearing a bikini. There's no nudity. It's getting a little bit more like racy, let's say. It reminds me a lot of thirst trap images that we see on social media, like, hot boys and girls on Instagram posing in a sexy way. It doesn't seem that risque initially because the images we're seeing are not X-rated. But then suddenly it takes a different turn. The image does become pixelated, which suggests nudity and much more explicit sexual performance. We're not really sure what's going on behind the pixelated bits, but it's like the imagination starts to wander, like, especially there's a point where the whole body and head are like pixelated. It's not just like from the neck down. I found that the most disturbing, actually. Like, what's going on with her face area? Like, why does that need to be pixelated? It was a very haunting, effective horror image. This bit really reminded me of like cam girl culture. Usually women performing sexually in front of the camera, inviting their viewers to tip them, and sometimes like taking direction from big tippers and doing more and more explicit things on camera. But I felt this was much darker. It evokes a little bit of camgirl culture, but we know that Harley is not fully in control. She's not the author of her own performance. We have to assume being forced to do things she doesn't want to do. She's being coerced. It takes that camgirl element of autonomy and sort of really twists it and presents it in a very corrupted way. So then we've got the next set piece, which is Hot Girl drinking milk. Now, this is the bit that really threw me for a loop. Like, it really shocked me. Here we have Harley wearing a sexy black halter top. She sits down at a table and starts to carefully wrap her entire head in gauze. And then starts to draw lips and eyes with lipstick over the fabric. So sort of like simulating basic features on a face. But it's a very haunting image. I have to say, it looks very scary. She then sits listlessly for ages and then proceeds to drink a glass of milk through the gauze. Milk like drips down her neck and chest. It's, for me, this is like really the defining image of this film. I have a lot of associations with obviously the milk. I mean, the milk is maybe very straightforward in terms of some kind of obscene mother reference, breast milk, or it can be just seen as like bukkake, which is like the Japanese porn of like a group of men ejaculating on a woman. So the whole pearl necklace discourse does apply, but I was more interested almost like in the gauze. And at first I thought, okay, is it just some kind of kinky taboo sex thing? Is there a community of people who enjoy watching women wrapped up in gauze? Is it like playing doctor? Doctors and nurses. I don't know. Like is there like a medical reference? I thought about it more and I realized she's only wrapped her head in gauze. And gauze, you put that over a part of your body that's been broken, let's say, or that's in need of healing or repair. So why just her head? And I started to think, okay, so maybe it's trying to say that her head's broken, like her mind is not okay. And the drawing on, rudimentary drawing of like 2 dots for eyes and a perfectly like formed pair of lips makes me think, okay, so it's just like, is this like a metaphor for someone with mental illness putting on a semblance of a persona for the world? Is it just like a mask that you wear? Is it like a kind of compensating action to try and fit in, right? Not stand out with, us having mental illness. And just because I kept thinking back to what Harley had said earlier about recently being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I thought, I wonder if this connects. So anyway, Sam sees that footage and he tells Harley that it's too commercial and mainstream. He tells Harley that his audience is weird and that, in fact, all horror fans are sickos and weirdos, and he needs more extreme footage from her. So also, I like this kind of line about the stereotype of horror fans being crazy and being like sickos, I like that the director feels the need to incriminate his own audience. Like, no one is sacred for this director, There's nobody he won't go after. He's even willing to like sell his own audience under the bus, Anyway, so he starts to give Harley further prompts. He directs her to push boundaries and cut herself while masturbating. And he says, the deeper the wound, the better, with as much blood as you can physically spare. And he says that she must use the blood as lubricant while masturbating, a reference to The Exorcist. Okay, so that sounds pretty grisly. And he insists that he doesn't want to see any fakery. He doesn't want any special effects at all. None of that is allowed. If he finds evidence of that, he'll come and cut Harley himself. So now we are in the moment where we see Lawrence R. Harvey's face. And this is a great reference. Like, his presence in the film is a fantastic, top-notch reference to Tom Six's Human Centipede 2, which of course featured Lawrence. He played Martin Lomax, this crazed horror movie fanatic who gets thrills watching the most depraved body horror content on the market. So we know this guy is the weirdest of the bunch. Like, he wants to see the most extreme. That's what's going to get him off. And we don't even need to actually see what Harley is doing in that moment, that content that Lawrence is watching, Whatever it is she's doing on camera, it almost doesn't even really matter. It's just knowing that her niche audience, represented by Lawrence here, is thrilled by whatever it is she's doing. And this is what ensures that we will imagine the worst and most deviant possible scenes being performed. So now we turn to Hot Girl Crying. Clearly, Harley's being directed to cry on camera. Maybe there have been some other directives as well. But all she's doing is just sitting on the floor, just weeping. It feels very naturalistic, very true to life. She does seem very distressed. She's visibly upset. This is when I started to think, so is this an element of the bipolar condition making itself known in the narrative? So Sam sends his notes and he complains that this is not what he asked. This is not what he asked for. He demands the requested footage or there'll be trouble. So there's no news from her in a while. And now Sam is starting to worry that she might have actually harmed herself while trying to get footage. And then he sees her Instagram story and is really annoyed because she's said that she's been through some dark days and she's ready for a fresh start. And he realizes that she has been around. She has probably been getting his messages, but she's just been ignoring him. And he says, I'll show you a fresh start. So we are invited to read it as a threat. So in the hot corpse sequence, it's implied that the director Sam is now outside, like physically outside Harley's apartment and watching her through the window. And he breaks into Harley's bedroom while she's sleeping and stands over her. And this then cuts to her voiceover paired with the image, like the beautiful painting of an angel centered within nature. And we hear her say how she wants to be remembered, that she wants to have made connections, human connections to spread and run deep. Some really kind of beautiful images are being evoked here, and that people will say of her that she looked closely, listened intently, loved fearlessly, and lived fully. This is actually really interesting, this bit. It's almost like a very close connection with how she might have performed as an actress, like following her director's instructions and prompts, that she's listened carefully, been fearless in her performance, and ultimately like lived it out in its fullest capacity. So when we think about it in that context, it doesn't sound so positive. Like it sounds like maybe she would have just been hoodwinked, to be taken advantage of by someone who doesn't have her best interest at heart. Now, this immediately is cut to the right arm of a man relentlessly strangulating her. The perpetrator is not revealed. We're invited to assume that it's Sam, the director, and Harley's trying to fight him off, but is failing. It is interesting that we only see the assailant's right arm, but he's not holding the camera. And when he removes his hand and walks away from Harley after she dies, the camera is still there, but who's filming? Who is watching? So it invites the idea that someone else is complicit here, or something else is complicit. So this is now my kind of post-analysis, having just gone through important elements in the film. There's a constant reminder that the point of tension, as with Sam's previous film, is between a male director and his female star, and that the power struggle is likely to persist in the next chapter. In the first Little More Flesh film, the final scene involves a woman slicing a penis, and this time a man strangles a woman's throat, cutting off her air supply to kill her. So the phallic element of the penis, i.e. the center of power, discursive power, is actually transferred to the seat of Harley's abilities, which are eroticized. Her voice, her ability to speak her mind, her breath of life. An overbearing, voyeuristic, tyrannical director ends up suffocating the star and removes her will to perform. She's no longer called into action and has lost her will to live. I just find it interesting, like the points of attack, the sliced penis and the strangulated throat. Those targeted assaults reveal something important about the center of power of the body part that is being attacked. In the first A Little More Flesh, the male sexual fantasy called the shots of the narrative in that film. Here, Harley's own power as a creator, her ability to use her voice, her vision, poses a problem for the director, interferes with his tyranny as a narcissist. So she has to be choked to death. If we stay within the bipolar narrative, the film suggests an experiential reality of alternating between mania and depression. And so I'm just kind of wondering, does it feel, when one is in a state of euphoria, like darkness is lurking just around the corner, constantly tracking you down on the verge of taking over? There seems to be like a stalker element of one mood forever prefiguring another, always following, watching longingly, biding its time and striking when you least expect it. This carries with it an approximation of never really being able to embody fully a mental state, but rather oscillating or fluctuating between two mindsets, waiting for one or the other to swap. That fear and that trauma is externalized and captured, personified in the body of a director who's always watching you and who is taking over your life. And maybe that would experientially translate on screen to a stalker. This is what endows the film with so much psychoanalytic meaning. So yeah, I just want to say congratulations to Sam and Harley for making a film during the pandemic that really does succeed in representing dark human impulses. They really succeeded in capturing that horror dimension on film. So congrats to them. Okay, guys, I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.